Not too long ago, Donald Trump signed an executive order invoking the Alien Enemies Act, giving him wartime powers to round up Venezuelan gang members and ship them to El Salvador's prison, all based on the premise that a state of war exists between the United States and Venezuela. The Alien Enemies Act grants the president emergency powers, supposedly because we are in a state of war. But war is declared by Congress here in the United States. And if it's not declared by Congress, it must be authorized by Congress. A president doesn't get to decide unilaterally that the United States is in a state of war with Venezuela. The Washington Post now reporting that the 18 spy agencies that comprise our National Intelligence Council issued a secret directive in early April informing our president that, we hate to break it to you, Mr. President, the United States has not been invaded by Venezuela. 18 of our nation's top spy agencies, answering to Tulsi Gabbard, she's the director of national intelligence, 18 of our nation's top spy agencies determined that Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, has not, in fact, ordered an invasion of the United States by sending gang members from Tren de Aragua here to the United States to murder, rape, engage in human trafficking, and illegal mining of our natural resources, despite President Trump's executive order claiming that is the case. So, Trump, just like George W. Bush when he wanted to invade Iraq, well, he wants his war, but all our nation's intelligence agencies are telling him, we weren't attacked by the country you want to invade. Mike Johnson, our speaker, calls himself a constitutional scholar. Well, Mike, our commander-in-chief, is justifying the deportation of migrants without any due process, claiming he possesses wartime powers because Venezuela has invaded our country. Where are the congressional hearings? Where is the debate, Speaker Johnson? Even George W. Bush went before Congress for a war authorization where he presented phony evidence that allowed our members of Congress to debate that war authorization. Where is the debate? Where are the hearings about this invasion of Venezuela? Call your member of Congress. Demand hearings on this war Donald Trump declared all by himself. More importantly, on today's show, I'm going to talk about why Democrats must win in 2026. We have to take back the House of Representatives. The Supreme Court is not going to save us. I hate to break it to you, the Democrats are. So I was watching Joe Biden speak earlier this week, and as I listened, I thought, if he had been reelected, or if Kamala had won, had the Democrats taken the House and kept the Senate, right now, there would be $1 trillion extra for our 2026 budget. The Trump tax cuts are set to expire at the end of the year. Had Biden won, or Kamala, they were going to let those tax cuts for the rich expire, and that would have added at least $500 billion a year in extra revenue. If Biden were president, or Kamala, the IRS wouldn't be gutted right now. There would still be more than 100,000 employees over at the IRS, and that means an extra $700 billion would be collected each year. See, Biden was finally addressing the tax gap, the gap between what is owed each year and what the IRS is able to collect. That's the reason he added so many agents to the Internal Revenue Service in his Inflation Reduction Act. They asked him, how are you going to pay for the Inflation Reduction Act? We're going to hire more IRS agents to collect the nearly $1 trillion a year that's owed to the government but never collected. So I don't think he would have been able to collect $1 trillion. I'm going to say $500 billion. But couple that with the tax cuts for the richest 1% expiring at the end of the year, that's more than $1 trillion a year we would have had that we don't now. Instead, Republicans are coming for our Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. I have many quarrels with the Democratic Party, but things would have been a lot different, a lot better, had Joe Biden or Kamala Harris won the White House in November. The same way, things would have been a lot better had Hillary won in 2016. I need not remind you that had Hillary Clinton won in 2016 and got reelected in 2020, there would now be a 6-3 liberal majority on the Supreme Court. Instead, it's the complete opposite, which is why this Supreme Court will not save us from fascism. Get to work for the Democratic Party. They're your only hope. I hate to break it to you. They're your only hope. I know you don't want to hear that. This is The Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Subscribe to this channel as well as my newsletter. The best way to support my efforts is by copying and pasting the link to this episode and sharing it with like-minded people. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is the 29-year-old El Salvadoran immigrant who was accidentally sent to that notorious prison in El Salvador. His wife and 3 children are American citizens. They live in Maryland. Senator Chris Van Hollen is a Democrat. He represents Maryland, and he flew down to El Salvador to check on Garcia. At first, he was denied entry, but there are now reports that the senator finally met with Garcia. This is a photo of the senator meeting with Garcia in a nearby restaurant in El Salvador. They didn't let him inside the prison, but he met with Garcia, the senator saying afterwards, quote, I said my main goal of this trip was to meet with Kilmar. Tonight, I had that chance. He added, quote, I've called his wife Jennifer to pass along his message of love. I look forward to providing a full update upon my return. El Salvador's president mocked the senator, taking to Twitter after Garcia met with Senator Van Hollen. The president of El Salvador said, quote, now that Mr. Abrego Garcia has miraculously risen from the death camps and torture in the tropical paradise of El Salvador, now that he's been confirmed healthy, he gets the honor of staying in El Salvador's custody. Bukele, the president of El Salvador, saying he has no intention of releasing Garcia. Why didn't you let the senator inside the prison? Why wasn't he allowed to see how Garcia was living? Congressman Robert Garcia is a Democrat from California. Maxwell Frost is a Democrat from Florida. They both sit on the House Oversight Committee and have officially asked the Republican chairman, James Comer, Republican, to authorize an official delegation to fly down to El Salvador to investigate the treatment of Garcia. 2 Republican House members have returned from their visit to the prison. They were allowed inside, not our senator from Maryland. They were allowed inside to use the prison as a photo op, insisting Garcia must remain there. You're looking at House Republican Riley Moore of West Virginia. Yeah, he was allowed inside the prison. on Wednesday. He got his photo up. Afterwards, he said the prison contains some of the world's most dangerous criminals, adding, "I leave now even more determined to support President Trump's effort to secure our homeland." House Republican Jason Smith of Missouri also visited the prison on Wednesday. He was allowed inside. The senator from Maryland, the Democrat, not allowed inside. They had to take Garcia to a restaurant. House Republican Jason Miller said later, quote, "Thanks to President Trump, the prison in El Salvador, which is home to some of the country's most vicious criminals, now includes illegal immigrants who broke into America and committed violent acts against our country." According to CBS News, there's zero proof that a single immigrant we sent there is a gang member. Zero evidence any of them were convicted or even charged with a violent crime against Americans. But he went on to say it's unconscionable that Democrats in Congress are urging the release of more foreign criminals back into our country. Jason Smith, Republican, chairs the House Ways and Means Committee. It's one of the most powerful positions in Congress. Disgraced House Republican Matt Gaetz says of the unmarried Congressman Jason Smith, quote, "He's living a lie." Jason Smith unmarried, and Matt Gaetz says he's living a lie. I wonder what Matt Gaetz is implying by that. Well, obviously, there's a lot to get to regarding the plight of Abrego Garcia. A Maryland federal court ordered the Trump administration to facilitate his return. The Trump administration appealed that judge's ruling, and late Thursday evening, the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the lower court's ruling. There is still wiggle room for the Trump administration. If you read these rulings and if you read what the Supreme Court is saying, right now, the Trump administration is not quite yet defying judicial orders. I'm going to read you a highlight from the appeals court ruling. It's Thursday's ruling. Now, keep in mind, Trump's lawyers are lying. They're saying, yes, they made a mistake, but now there's nothing they can do because Garcia is in the custody of a foreign government. Trump's lawyers are arguing that this is no longer a legal issue. It is a diplomatic one, a negotiation between El Salvador and the United States to release Garcia. And the Supreme Court and the circuit courts have no right to dictate foreign policy, since that role is vested inside the executive branch as well as sometimes the legislative branch. That is the argument they're making. So, in its ruling, the court wrote, this is the appeals court, not the Supreme Court, quote, "It is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of this matter. But with this case, it is not hard at all. The government is asserting," when they say the government, they mean Trump, "the government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order." The ruling goes on. They're calling Garcia a resident, by the way. I should mention that, not a citizen. Okay, they go on to write. Further, the government claims, the government would be Trump and the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, the government claims, in essence, that because it has rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses still hold dear. The ruling goes on. The government asserts that Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. So, let me just explain something here. The Supreme Court ruled earlier this month that Trump can continue to deport migrants, citing the Alien Enemies Act. But these migrants or immigrants or suspected gang members must be given due process. There must be a habeas corpus hearing, and each individual must be given an opportunity before an immigration judge to prove they are not, in fact, enemy combatants. The Supreme Court punted on the Alien Enemies Act and said that's for another time. But right now, Trump can invoke the Alien Enemies Act and use his wartime powers until we issue a ruling on that. But for the time being, he can still have these war powers, but he cannot deport any of these so-called terrorists without due process. None of the prisoners that ICE sent to El Salvador were given due process. So the court goes on to write, if the government is confident of its position, it should be assured that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. I know that makes no sense. But anyway, it goes on. Moreover, the government has conceded that Abrego Garcia was wrongfully or mistakenly deported. Why then should it not make what was wrong right? Okay? Moreover, this is what the court wrote. Moreover, the government has conceded that Abrego Garcia was wrongly or mistakenly deported. Why then should it not make what was wrong right? Here is where I think the wiggle room for the Trump administration can be found. The appeals court writes, quote, the Supreme Court's decision remains, as always, our guidepost. So the circuit court, the appeals court, is saying, this is our ruling, but we're going by that the Supreme Court's directive that got handed down, I believe, on the 10th. And that decision, they go on to write, that decision rightly requires the lower federal courts to give due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. That would allow sensitive diplomatic negotiations to be removed from public view. It would recognize as well that the facilitation of Abrego Garcia's return leaves the executive branch with options in the execution to which the courts, in accordance with the Supreme Court's decision, should extend a genuine deference. Let me explain what that means using the English language. What the appeals court is saying, and this is why I'm not optimistic. The appeals court Thursday night is saying we recognize the Supreme Court may end up ruling that Garcia is no longer in the custody of the American government. Therefore, it's up to the State Department to negotiate his release because, since we're dealing with another government, a Supreme Court ruling would not be binding. I'm not optimistic. I'm trying to present to you what I think the Trump administration is going to argue, and I think what this cowardly Supreme Court, this venal Supreme Court, is going to rule. Like I said, it's the Democrats in 2026, not the Supreme Court now, that's going to save us. I think the lower courts would, but not this Supreme Court, which overrules the lower courts. This is a Supreme Court of right-wing extremists, and I have no doubt, and I hope I'm wrong, I have no doubt they're going to rule that it's not up to the courts, it's up to the executive branch and Congress to decide the fate of Garcia. And that this is a matter of diplomacy. It's a matter of foreign policy that is determined. Foreign policy is determined by the ruling party. And I can imagine this effing Supreme Court writing that if the American people want redress, if they're unhappy with Donald Trump's foreign policy, they should vote the Republicans out of office in 2026. That's how I see this court ruling on Garcia. The Supreme Court will rule the American people voted. They get to vote again in 2026 if they want to change our country's foreign policy. Well, more on all this later. I know it's dry and depressing. It's rough going. It's not optimistic. But again, there's more of us than there are of them. So we have an update on that police shooting of an autistic teenager with cerebral palsy in Pocatello, Idaho last Saturday. 17-year-old Victor Perez was taken off life support and died just days after being shot by police, shot 9 times, 12 seconds after cops arrived on the scene and spotted Perez standing behind a chain-link fence brandishing a knife. Perez's family said they plan to sue. Perez's death highlights the training local police lack when dealing with the developmentally disabled. Although considering Perez also had cerebral palsy, could barely walk or talk, it makes me wonder whether those 4 officers who killed him were also developmentally disabled. 4 cops, 9 shots, 12 seconds after arriving on the scene, they spot a developmentally disabled teenager with cerebral palsy behind a chain-link fence carrying a knife, and they fire away. No stun gun, no mace, no time to talk. 9 shots. Well, as more and more people around the world find themselves with autistic loved ones, more and more people around the world are calling for autistic awareness. They're calling for everyone to pause and consider the people you're dealing with and ask, might they be on the spectrum? Neri Alvarado Borges is a 25-year-old Venezuelan migrant living in Texas with an autism awareness tattoo on his arm in honor of his 15-year-old brother. He was one of 238 migrants flown to El Salvador's notorious prison last month after an ICE agent in Dallas, Texas, decided this tattoo signified membership in the gang known as Tren de Aragua, which Trump has mislabeled a terrorist organization. Now, this happened despite other ICE agents searching the young man's phone and finding no evidence of any gang membership. And they informed the Dallas ICE agent that the tattoo is about autism awareness. It's not a sign of a gang membership. ICE agents told the Dallas ICE agent, quote, "He's clean, let him go." But that plane, those 3 planes to El Salvador had to be loaded up. So off he went. According to 60 Minutes, of the 238 men shipped to that prison in El Salvador, 75% have 0 criminal record, 0 gang affiliations. The other 25% have no gang affiliations and have only been charged previously with nonviolent misdemeanors like trespassing and shoplifting. There may be 3 or 4 who might be violent. None of them had a habeas corpus hearing or were read their rights, But the Trump administration continues to flat out lie, calling these men violent gang members, terrorists. Indeed, according to Trump's executive order justifying their deportation, enemy combatants waging war against the United States on behalf of Venezuela. This despite all our intelligence agencies informing him we haven't been invaded by Venezuela. According to Trump and the Department of Homeland Security, a state of war now exists between the United States and Venezuela. Where is Congress on this? Well, members of Congress are on spring break right now. Congressional spring break is the polar opposite of college spring break. Congressional spring break means members go home, spend time with their families, sober up, and stop trying to get laid. Iowa Senate Republican Chuck Grassley held a town hall in Lee County, Iowa on Tuesday to meet his constituents, but was booed after telling them he can't help Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's the 28-year-old El Salvadoran husband and father of 3 children, all U.S. citizens. He was accidentally shipped to El Salvador on board one of those 3 flights carrying the 238 Venezuelan men, all of whom wrongly accused of being gang members. 238 Venezuelan men, and then some El Salvadorans like Garcia. ICE, as you know, called it a mistake. But the Trump Justice Department telling our courts there's nothing they can do because Garcia is now in the custody of El Salvador. Chuck Grassley chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee. The people attending his town hall did not like it when Grassley said, "There's nothing I can do for Garcia. My hands are tied." Well, so are Garcia's. The difference is, unlike Chuck Grassley, Garcia's not paying a dominatrix to do it for him. Pam Bondi is our Attorney General, and she continues to lie and lie and lie, repeatedly calling Garcia a member of MS-13. This despite 3 of her own lawyers in the Justice Department telling 3 separate courtrooms Garcia is not MS-13. ICE made a mistake. Well, she suspended one of her attorneys who told a Maryland judge he had no evidence Garcia is a gang member, adding he had no idea how the Trump administration, who he was representing at the time, planned to defend Garcia's incarceration since it was clearly a mistake. Pam Bondi suspended this lawyer. She also told reporters during a meeting in the Oval Office with the president of El Salvador that Garcia is MS-13. And then she accused Democrats of being detached from reality for wanting him returned. Later in the week, Pam Bondi, during a press conference, she's our Attorney General, she lied saying, quote, "Garcia is an illegal alien who has been living illegally in our country from El Salvador. ICE testified, an immigration judge ruled he was a member of MS-13. An appellate judge ruled he was a member of MS-13, hard stop," unquote. Well, ICE did not testify that he was MS-13. ICE said it was a mistake, an administrative error. And it was not an appellate judge. It was an immigration judge who ruled in 2019 that Garcia is not a gang member and that he requires protected legal status because El Salvadoran gangs are threatening his life as well as his mother's because he refused to join. But despite the facts Attorney General Pam Bondi continues to lie and lie, which makes me begin to think she may not really be a blonde. Trump's counterterrorism director, Sebastian Gorka, who became a U.S. citizen in 2012, telling Newsmax that any Americans calling for Garcia's return not only hate America, but are abetting the enemy. Abetting the enemy. That would be Venezuela, who all our intelligence agencies have told you and Donald Trump they are not our enemy. Makes me wonder who the enemy is. Gorka, Sebastian Gorka, by the way, speaking of abetting the enemy, celebrates Vitesse Rend. This is a far-right pro-Nazi group that his father was a member of back in Hungary. He carries a medallion from Vitesse Rend, a neo-Nazi group that was given to him. Well, in any authoritarian regime, such as Donald Trump's, the counterterrorism director, in this case Sebastian Gorka, would categorize citizens as enemies of the state simply for wanting to honor the law. People like Pam Bondi, Sebastian Gorka, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, these people commit violence first against the language, then against the rule of law, and finally against the American people. This is the precise variety of lawlessness endemic to all authoritarian regimes. It's why January 6 had to be prosecuted. But instead, our Supreme Court slow-walked their immunity ruling until it was too late. Stephen Miller, White House Deputy Chief of Staff, also lying with joyful abandon, telling reporters that Garcia is not only a terrorist, but that a judge ordered him to be sent to that prison in El Salvador. Stephen Miller saying, no, a judge sent him down there. That there was a hearing and a judge sent him down there. A lie. Everything Trump and members of his administration say is a lie. In the past, I've told you about the pro-democracy Russian chess master Garry Kasparov, who tried to fight the rise of Vladimir Putin. Kasparov often talks about how every authoritarian regime lies, not just to cover up their misdeeds, but to exhaust the people's critical thinking. He says the idea behind these lies is primarily to, quote, unquote, exhaust the people's critical thinking. Garry Kasparov says democracies are killed by people who annihilate the truth so that it becomes impossible for ordinary citizens to ascertain what is actually real. So, Garcia doesn't belong in that prison. The Trump regime sees this as an opportunity to torture reality. Caroline Leavitt is Trump's White House spokesperson who repeatedly lies about everything and lately about Garcia, despite all the evidence to the contrary. She declared on Tuesday, for example, quote, Abrego Garcia was a foreign terrorist. He is an MS-13 gang member. He was engaged in human trafficking, unquote. Now he's engaged in human trafficking. That's a new lie. I don't know. I don't see how Caroline Leavitt lasts at this job, because if she keeps telling this many lies, Trump's ego won't be able to handle it. Trump is threatened by women, especially a woman who's lying more than he is. I would dial it back a little, Caroline. Don't outshine mein Führer. So, again, this isn't just about sadism. This isn't just about keeping Garcia in that prison. This isn't just about satisfying the bloodlust of MAGA Republicans. This isn't just about sharpening the tools for a police state. The escalation of these lies are also designed to destroy objective truth and knowledge. It is a war on truth and knowledge. It's why the Trump regime is attempting to literally destroy Harvard and universities like Columbia, rob them of their federal funding. In Harvard's case, rob Harvard of its tax-exempt status, and dictate which students Harvard can accept, and when they're accepted, what they are taught. These are the executive orders coming down. It all starts with calling our news media the fake press. This week, Donald Trump accused CNN of hating America. He calls CNN the enemy of the people. You destroy the credibility of legitimate journalists who are tasked with chronicling history. First, you destroy their credibility. Simultaneously, you destroy the universities, convince the angry mob they can't trust accredited colleges and universities. You can't trust experts, and you can't trust the news media. For Trump, I am the truth because I am the state. There's nothing new here. This, what I just told you, could have been copied and pasted into speeches about authoritarian regimes throughout most of the 20th century. Donald Trump is stupid. The people who vote for him are stupid, and of course the people he surrounds himself with are stupid. Fascists are stupid. Stupid people can't brook dissent. Stupid people are fascists because it's the easiest thing to be. You don't have to know anything to be a fascist. Why study? Why read when you can invent facts? And the more contradictory those facts, the better. It doesn't take a genius to run an authoritarian regime. All it takes is a dumbed-down society ripe for the picking and even dumber enablers. And, of course, violence. These are not intelligent people. These are angry, violent people. And throughout history, throughout the 20th century, they're always the same people. It's copy and paste. There's nothing original here. They all work off the same exact playbook. Yes, there's a fascist playbook. And so long as America, as the United States of America, deludes itself in believing there's such a thing as American exceptionalism, too many of us remain convinced we're immune to the fascist playbook because we're different. What works on other societies like Germany, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Chile can't possibly work on the United States of America because we're exceptional. No, we're just as susceptible to the charms of fascism as anyone else, if not more so. So stop saying we're turning into Nazi Germany. We are turning into MAGA America. Forget Hitler. Deal with Trump. This is different from Nazi Germany, the same way Mussolini and Franco were different from Nazi Germany. This is MAGA America that we are resisting. There are countless examples of democracies gone bad, not just Nazi Germany. We're now one of them. We're now a democracy, a democratic republic that's gone bad. I need not remind you of ancient Rome's republic giving way to the Caesars. Read about Salazar in Portugal from 1932 to 1968, Juan Perón in Argentina, Vargas in Brazil, Videla in Argentina, Batista in Cuba, Papa and Baby Doc in Haiti, Somoza in Nicaragua, Stroessner in Paraguay, the list goes on. Practically every country in Central and South America at some time during the 20th century was run by a fascist dictator. And most, if not all of those fascist dictators were propped up by the United States of America. Not only is there a fascist playbook, but this country wrote most of the chapters. An Associated Press reporter was allowed into a White House briefing this week for the first time since a judge ordered Trump's ban to be lifted. AP, you might recall, was stripped of its credentials after it refused to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Again, the obliteration of reality. You can't describe the truth when there are no longer any words for it. Words, language, they make up the social contract. There can be no social contract without words. When you rob words of meaning, there can be no law. Right now, the Trump Justice Department is fighting the federal judge in Maryland who ordered the Department of Justice to bring Garcia home. And right now, Trump's lawyers are arguing over the definition of the words facilitate and effectuate. Many of my favorite writers keep insisting we're approaching a constitutional crisis. I say we have been in a constitutional crisis since July of last year, after the Supreme Court ruled presidents are immune from prosecution. The court ruled that it's up to the American people to decide every 4 years what a president can and can't do. Well, that's not what our Constitution says. It says if you once swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and then participated in an insurrection, you are automatically disqualified from ever holding elective office. The 14th Amendment couldn't be any clearer about this, but our Supreme Court last year said that rule doesn't apply to the president. The Supreme Court decided that former presidents cannot be tried after they leave office for any crimes they committed while performing official acts as president. And our Supreme Court took its sweet time on that ruling, making it impossible for Special Counsel Jack Smith to proceed with his prosecution of Donald Trump by Election Day, which is exactly what the Supreme Court intended. It's why they waited until the very last day to issue a ruling on presidential immunity, because the Supreme Court wanted the American people to decide Trump's guilt or innocence, not our courts. The Supreme Court surrendered our Constitution to mob rule. Trump's guilt or innocence, they basically wrote, would be determined by the November 5th presidential election. That's not a constitutional crisis. That's tearing the Constitution apart. The foundational idea of our Constitution is representative democracy, which means the people govern themselves, but not at the expense of the mob. Majoritarian rule is not necessarily the law. Mobs do not decide guilt or innocence. Otherwise, our criminal justice system would be nothing but jailhouse lynchings. But that's what the Supreme Court ruled in its immunity decision. It's up to the American people on Election Day to render a verdict on Donald Trump's guilt or innocence. So, spare me the hand-wringing that we're approaching a constitutional crisis. We're there. Sit in reality. We're in a constitutional crisis. We've been in one since November 5th, when Donald Trump won, and Jack Smith, the special counsel, closed up shop. Can the president, people are asking now, and they mean this, they ask, well, what happens if the president defies the Supreme Court? Is he going to do that? Of course he's going to defy the Supreme Court. What are you, a child? According to the Supreme Court's ruling last July, a president can defy the Supreme Court if he's doing so in his official role as president. The court ruled in July the president can break the law. There is no law when he's performing official acts as president. One could argue there isn't even a constitutional crisis because there no longer is a constitution. Why are you wasting time wondering if Donald Trump is going to defy the Supreme Court? Of course he is. What remedy is there? This is why Caroline Leavitt, his White House press spokesman, is telling reporters about Garcia. If Garcia ever ends up back in the United States, quote, we would immediately be deporting him again. Well, he wasn't deported. He was illegally arrested without due process, then wrongly accused and shipped off to that prison in El Salvador. But it doesn't matter. The president of the United States, thanks to the Supreme Court, has immunity. He can do whatever he wants, including disobey our Supreme Court. The Supreme Court right now has theoretically ordered Trump to bring Garcia home. Theoretically, they've ordered that. But last July, in their immunity ruling, they said there are no remedies if Trump ignores us. You cannot try Trump in a court of law for disobeying the courts, because he's disobeying the courts, performing his official role as president. Border czar Tom Homan telling Fox News that if Garcia is returned, quote, I'll deport him again. Because Homan's all about law and order, even when it means disobeying the law. Well, it's not as if Biden, Kamala, Democrats, liberals on the court didn't warn us about that immunity ruling. It's not as if we hadn't been warned by Liz Cheney about what would happen if Donald Trump found his way back into the Oval Office. Biden was proposing a constitutional amendment to overturn the Supreme Court's immunity ruling. Homan, who was director of ICE during the first Trump administration, where he devised the family separation policy, telling Fox and Friends, quote, Garcia wasn't abducted. He's an MS-13 gang member, classified as a terrorist that was removed from this country, so we got rid of a dangerous person, unquote. Now, the people watching Fox and Friends hear the border czar say that. Must be true. A gang member and a terrorist. Well, the man's last name is Garcia. How much more does a Fox News viewer need to know? So, they're sadistic liars. Homan, Leavitt, J.D. Vance, Sebastian Gorka. These are sadistic, Pam Bondi, sadistic liars. In order to work in the White House, you are asked to watch 4 hours of crush videos. And if you're still hard, they give you the job. The New Republic reporting that former Project 2025 co-author and Trump's new FCC chair, Brendan Carr, getting into the act, calling Garcia MS-13. Now, Brendan Carr is the head of the Federal Communications Commission, which licenses broadcast television and radio stations. Here he is lying about Garcia, calling him MS-13 for no reason other than he has nothing better to do. Carr, this is the head of the FCC, accusing NBC News of lying about Garcia when it reported that Garcia has no gang affiliation. Not only that, Carr, the head of the FCC, is threatening Comcast, NBC News' parent company, warning that if they don't do something about their news division, they run the danger of losing their broadcast licenses, specifically because NBC News is reporting that Garcia is not MS-13. Carr has already told CBS News' parent company that he intends to block their merger because of the way 60 Minutes edited an interview with Kamala Harris to, according to Donald Trump, make her look smarter than she actually is. He subpoenaed the transcripts of the full interview, which, if you read the full transcripts of the interview, there was no editing to make Kamala Harris smarter than she actually is. And even if they did, the First Amendment protects them. And yet MAGA Republicans claim to be all about the First Amendment. We are uncompromising defenders of free speech. So Garcia has technically been ordered home, but the presidents of both the United States and El Salvador, meeting in the Oval Office this week, mocked the court order, saying, we can't return them. Can't do it. It's like CVS accidentally billing you $500 for a $10 medication. Sorry, there's nothing I can do. It's in the system. Once it's in the system, we can't reverse that $500 charge. El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele, who refers to himself as the cool dictator in the Oval Office, called Garcia a terrorist. Since he declared a national emergency in 2022, Bukele declared a national emergency in 2022. He's locked up close to 100,000 of his own people. Per capita, El Salvador now has more prisoners than the United States. It is the prisoner capital of the world. And very few of the people he's locked up have been charged with a crime, and they're never leaving. He said, this is for life. These are life sentences. Hundreds have died due to medical neglect and torture. And more importantly, Bukele is negotiating with the gangs, paying members of MS-13 and Barrio 18 millions of dollars if they agree to bring down the number of homicides in El Salvador. In exchange for better treatment behind bars, some in-prison gang leaders have agreed to tell their surrogates on the outside to dial back the violence. This, according to several news organizations, including El Faro, the leading news organization in El Salvador. Mr. Cool Dictator, not just negotiating with terrorists, paying them. Turns out paying the gang members is more effective than locking them up. Inside the Oval Office, El Salvador's cool dictator, who pays gang leaders not to commit crimes, tried to get on Trump's good side by openly mocking transgender athletes. Bukele says he's appalled that transgender women are competing in high school sports here in the United States, but apparently he has no problem with 1,000 El Salvadoran children sharing jail cells with grown men in his so-called state-of-the-art prison. I'm going to wrap it up. I know I went over some court rulings, and they're not easy to understand. I just want to remind you, because it's a lot to digest. On April 10th, in a vaguely worded 9-0 ruling, our Supreme Court sided with Garcia in a way. It upheld a lower court ruling demanding the Trump administration effectuate and facilitate Garcia's return to the United States. The Trump lawyers now are bickering over the definition of effectuate and facilitate. The Supreme Court wrote that Garcia had been improperly sent to El Salvador. This is what the Supreme Court ruled in their 9-0 ruling on April 10th. Quote, this order requires the government to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador, unquote. That is the Supreme Court. Facilitate his release. He's been improperly sent to El Salvador. The Supreme Court wrote that. But as I am warning you, it still leaves wiggle room for this Trump administration to demand that the Supreme Court show deference owed to the executive branch when it comes to foreign affairs. That's the way the Supreme Court is going to get out of ordering Garcia's release. They're going to say, "What? He's in the custody. He's an El Salvadoran citizen in the custody of El Salvador. It is not the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. This is a matter of diplomacy. It's up to Donald Trump and Rubio, the Secretary of State, to negotiate Garcia's release." But Trump doesn't want Garcia released. And the court is going to rule the only remedy is to change Trump's foreign policy by electing a Democratic Senate and House of Representatives in 2026 and replacing Trump in 2028. As I said earlier, Trump will defy the lower courts and this Supreme Court. That's what's going to happen. Meanwhile, there are billions to be made for private contractors housing detainees in for-profit prison camps. So El Salvador is getting $6 million a year to take in about 300 migrants. Erik Prince, the founder of Blackwater, that was the for-profit corporate gang of mercenaries. Erik Prince is proposing that Trump contract with his new company so Erik Prince can begin rounding up immigrants here in the United States and then shipping them off to El Salvador. He wants in on this. There's money to be made, not just in housing the migrants in for-profit detention centers, but in rounding them up. According to an exclusive report in Politico, Erik Prince has proposed that the Trump administration designate portions of that notorious El Salvador prison as a U.S. territory subject to the laws of the United States and not El Salvador. By doing that, Prince believes tens of thousands of migrants in the United States can be rounded up by Erik Prince's company for profit and then shipped to parts of that El Salvadoran prison officially designated as American territory. And because it's now American territory, the arrests could not be subject to court challenges. It opens the door, not just for sending migrants, but U.S. citizens. If parts of El Salvador's prison are designated as American territory, then we can send American citizens convicted of crimes to El Salvador. Meanwhile, Trump has said repeatedly he likes the idea of sending American citizens convicted of violent crimes to that prison in El Salvador. And this week he said he's officially asked his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to look into the legalities of such a move. University of Notre Dame professor Aaron Cochrane, an immigration law expert, telling Reuters there is nothing in the Constitution that would allow the government to ship American citizens to a foreign prison. Well, if parts of that prison have been designated American territory, but most of the constitutional experts continue to insist shipping American citizens to the El Salvador prison violates the Eighth Amendment's mandate against cruel and unusual punishment. Really. Suddenly, we're worried about the Eighth Amendment in the United States. Most of our prisons are already in direct violation of the Eighth Amendment. Solitary confinement. The Supreme Court said about California's prisons back in 2011 that they violated the Eighth Amendment and ordered nonviolent inmates to be released. Kamala Harris, the state attorney general at the time, slow-walked that order. I have no idea how Rikers Island here in New York City or the Fulton County Sheriff's Jail, where Trump was arraigned down in Georgia, I have no idea how those rat-infested, overcrowded suicide traps haven't been ruled cruel and unusual punishment in direct violation of the Eighth Amendment. I don't think we enforce the Eighth Amendment here in the United States. Yes, the Supreme Court went after California's prisons, and they had to be partially emptied. But rarely do our courts, our constitutional scholars, worry about excessive fines and all the other protections from against cruel and unusual punishment outlined in the Eighth Amendment. And now, with Eric Prince, Blackwater, suggesting the Trump administration designate parts of a foreign prison as U.S. territory? Come on. Come on. How hard is it? How heavy a lift is it going to be to send American citizens to that prison in El Salvador unless you speak up? Unless you speak. There are more of us than there are of them. They're going to have to start rounding up American citizens because, like I said, there's a lot of money to be made keeping people behind bars, and we all know about the loophole in the 13th Amendment, having them work for pennies on the dollar. Geo Group and CoreCivic, the two leading for-profit prisons companies, they make hundreds of millions of dollars from ICE contracts. After the 2026 budget is passed, if the Democrats allow this, they're going to start making billions from rounding up and detaining migrants, and they put them to work. The detainees, I'm not making this up, are offered more soup if they agree to help paint and clean up around the place. This is why these detention facilities are called concentration camps. But at some point, they're going to run out of migrants. In fact, the number of people trying to sneak into this country is down for a second month in a row. It's plummeting. Trump has a problem. During the final year of the Biden administration, the number of migrants coming into this country hit a 5-year low. I promise no math, but in March of 2024, that would be a year ago, 137,000 migrants tried to come into our country. In March of this year, it was down to 7,000. That's a 95% decrease year over year. Not good. We need these people. We need these people. Biden, if you want to give him credit, in January of 2024, there were 156,000 migrants apprehended. In his last month in office, January 2025, 29,000. That's an 82% decline. He did that by reallocating Department of Homeland Security resources, working with governments like Mexico, and he tripled the number of deportations. Last year, Biden kicked out 685,000 people. That's the highest number since Obama in 2010, when Obama earned the title of Deporter-in-Chief. He gave himself that. So when it comes to terrorizing these migrants. There are no angels here. There really aren't. Democrats and Republicans are both to blame. Biden and Obama kicked the migrants out. To their credit, they tried to put an end to for-profit detention facilities. And the difference is they didn't delight in it. They were ashamed and embarrassed. They refused to teach the American people that we need the migrants. This migrant crisis was always phony. We need these people, and we can't get rid of them because our economy would collapse without them. In the past, immigrants were political footballs, but now they are being used by Trump to destroy politics, to create a climate of fear with a weaponized Department of Homeland Security, a weaponized Justice Department, using this phony invasion of migrants so the president can invoke wartime powers and rule with unlimited authority. I don't think this Supreme Court will save us from Donald Trump. Fascists can be defeated peacefully and legally. Doesn't usually end the way it does in Nazi Germany. There are countless examples of people rising up legally and peacefully. The Supreme Court and the Republicans are not going to save this country. There has to be more of us than them. And I hate to break it to you, it means working for the Democratic Party. Even Pelosi, even Chuck Schumer. Yes. The midterms. I hope I'm surprised, but the courts are not going to save us, because even if they do issue a ruling that saves us, that immunity ruling back in July of last year says Trump doesn't have to obey it. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for listening to me. Stay strong. Stay involved. Talk to people. Communicate. Be present. We can do this. We can do it. Start writing. Don't get arrested. Don't turn your body over to the police. Don't allow the police to have power over your body. Speak up. Pay attention to all the heroes out there. Be a hero. Speak up. Leave a comment. If I made any mistakes, let me know. Thank you.